Hola a todos, buenas tardes. Hello everyone, good afternoon. Bienvenidos a nuestro segundo evento en vivo con la Librería Pública de Grand Rapids, celebrando la herencia hispana. Mi nombre es Osvaldo y soy bibliotecario del Departamento de Jóvenes. Este evento va a ser completamente en inglés. Ahora luego pondremos la grabación en nuestro canal de YouTube, en el cual podrán poner subtítulos en su lenguaje de preferencia. Para todos los que están viendo, por favor, opriman el botón like y compartan el evento. Para aquellas personas o amistades que se pueden aprovechar de esta discusión y participen en los comentarios en la parte de abajo. Si les gustaría hacer una pregunta o comentario a nuestros invitados. Now in English, hi everyone, good afternoon, and welcome to our second event with the Grand Rapids Public Library celebrating Hispanic heritage. My name is Osvaldo, and I'm a Youth Services Librarian at GRPL. This event will be entirely in English, well, maybe some Spanglish. However, we will later upload the recording on our YouTube channel, in which you will be able to enable closed captions in your preferred language. Please hit the like button and share the event for those friends who can take advantage or be interested in today's discussion. Then please leave questions or comments in the comments section below. If you would like to ask anything to our guests today, I'll be passing on those questions and comments to them. So to not delay the event any longer, be sure to grab a snack, some coffee, some tea, relax, and enjoy the event. I'll leave you now in good hands with our friend Sonya Hernandez.
Good evening, everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Sonya Hernandez, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Hispanic Latino Commission of Michigan. Thank you to the Grand Rapids Public Library for hosting this event and inviting me to be a part of it as the moderator. As you well know, the topic of identity is one that can be very passion-led. It can lead to discussions that can end up in ended friendships or kinships. But tonight, what we want to talk about is identity within the Latino community. Some of us identify as Latino, some identify as Hispanic, some identify as Latinx, some say Chicano. There are many identities that we all identify with. And so our esteemed panel this evening come from a diverse background. And I, at this time, would love for them to introduce themselves. And we will start with Jessica Ledesma.
Thank you, Sonya. I'm Jessica Ledesma. The way that I identify is I tell people that I celebrate a rich Mexican heritage. Often that comes from what are you, where are you from, and versus trying to correct them, I try to educate a little bit more of my heritage. Currently, I lead work at the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber of Commerce through the Building Bridges Through Education initiative, where the goal is to help bridge college and career with Latinx college talent across Michigan.
Thank you. Erica.
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Erika Soto. I am Puerto Rican. I identify as Puerto Rican, also she, they pronouns. I am a leader within the community and wear several different hats. First, as I am the assistant director for the Seidman Center Boys and Girls Club, and we serve the community in many different ways, especially throughout the pandemic. We've been feeding families, and now we have been supporting young folks K through 12 in virtual online learning. And then also I am the president of BL²END, Business Leaders Linked to Encourage New Directions. And we support professionals of color within our community to thrive through professional development, social networking, and community outreach. I have also done panel discussions on Puerto Ricanness and my Puerto Ricanness, and also have served our community in, like I said, many other ways. I believe that was.
Thank you so much. Reyna.
Hi, my name is Reyna Masko, and I am Salvadoreña. I work for Ottawa County Front of the Cord, and I'm also the Children's and Youth Director at St. John's Episcopal Church here in Grand Haven. My work with the community has been chairing the Cultural Intelligence Initiative for Ottawa County for 7 years, and assisting in establishing the county's Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And then also doing a lot of advocacy within the courts, the access to courts, language barriers, and resources such as financial resources to undocumented families during this time of COVID.
Thank you. Luana.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reyna, and I am a librarian at GRPL, and I'm also a therapist at a private practice. And I identify as I am Dominican. I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, and my pronouns are she, her, and ella.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Luana. And last but definitely not least, Bo.
Buenas noches todos. Good evening, everybody. Adonis Torres, or Bo, and the Bo is for Boricua, originally from Mayagüez, Puerto Rico, Jíbaro. I have been in West Michigan for a while now, working in different initiatives, making sure that the Latinx community is well represented. Member of Latinx community means that I am an ally for persons who come from the LGBTQ plus communities. I am a leader from the Latino network here in West Michigan, trying to represent those issues that really impact Latinos. Also working on election issues with the environment. Disparately, our community as a whole has issues from infant mortality rates, which are some of the highest in the country, to bad air quality, to water issues and water rights and water purity. So we want to make sure that the Latinx community is well represented, and I'm really, really humbled to be here amongst such powerful women from our community.
Thank you, Bo. So this evening, we will we'll be discussing some subtopics as well. So we'll be starting with the meaning of Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Chicano, and other terms that we utilize to define ourselves. We'll be discussing unfair systemic challenges, as well as, excuse me, misconceptions about the Hispanic and Latino communities. I, like Jessica, celebrate a rich Mexican heritage, and I identify as Latina over Hispanic. And that is something that I just feel more comfortable with. I noticed when our panelists introduced themselves, none of them refer to themselves as either Hispanic or Latino. They identify themselves as their country of origin or the culture from the Hispanic and Latino umbrella that they most identify with and celebrate. And so with that, we will get started. The meaning of Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Bo touched on it a little bit regarding Latinx. So Bo, let's get started with you. How many, there are many people who are against using the term Latinx. What are your thoughts behind that term and the reason why it's used? And I want to couple that with, how do you explain the difference between Hispanic and Latino?
All right, well, thank you. And when we're looking at the term Hispanic, so we have to look at that to begin with, right? Before that, we refer to ourselves, as many of us did on this call, Mexicano, Ecuatoriano, Puerto Riqueño, Boricua. So those were the identifications. But in 1980 was the first time that that language was first used. So when we're talking about Hispanic, Hispanic is a term that was used by the government to identify us. It's still being used in different areas. Basically in the government, when we're writing for grants or when we're writing for different funding, we use the term Hispanic. Latino was my generation. When we're looking at Generation X, right? We're looking at a fight that was fought to make sure that we identify as a term that was used previous to that, right? How do we identify the diaspora as a whole? We look at Latino or Latino-ness as that cultural aspect to move away from Hispanic. There was never a real consensus whether those two would be used on our census. There's a great article that was written by an author, and I can look up her name right now. Her name is Araceli Cruz from Teen Vogue, actually, where she really breaks down all of the history of the terminology. But when we look at now the terminology of Latinx, right, the evolution of language continues. So as we look at our own patriotism, as we look at our own national heritage and culture, we move into a governmental term that was created and first used in the 1980 census. Then we move towards Latino, the fight for real identity and what it is to be Boricua, Chicano, Mexicano, Hondureño. what that means for us. And now Latinx, how we are using more inclusive language, how we are moving away from a patriarchal kind of language and linguistic expression to be more inclusive. So when we look at our LGBTQ plus community, as we look at those who don't identify by gender normalities, right? We try to move away and become more inclusive. It is the language of those that come after us that matters. For some, they still feel very comfortable with the term Hispanic. For some, they still very comfortable with the word Latino. But for those that are coming behind us, for those that are paving the way for the future, the term Latinx is now something that I use and that I see as something that is not for me, but it's for those that we want to be more inclusive of.
And so, Bo, so if someone who wants to be inclusive but uses the word Hispanic, is there a term to be more inclusive utilizing the word Hispanic? Or is it because it's more general that it's not needed?
I think it has more to do with what the person themselves, right? If someone wants to call me Adonis as the person that I am, then that's the term that they would use, right? Many people know me as Bo. And some do not understand that Bo is actually short for Boricua. So I was asked previously by persons that didn't really know me, well, why would you Americanize yourself in that way and call yourself Bo, not understanding that it actually comes from Boricua? I have an anecdote from my youngest sister. And she, when we were first learning English here in this country, she would ask me, what is Hispanic? And we're learning. I was like, well, Hicha, I would call her Hicha. That's what they call us here. They call us Hispanic. And as she's learning English, she would say, well, I'm not anybody's panic. I'm not his panic. I'm not her panic. And that always rung to me. How can you look at language in a way and see it through your own lenses and what that means when someone's learning a language or what that means when you're translating it into the meaning? So that's always stayed with me. And the term Hispanic is something that I really don't use, but it's something that I see as used widely and broadly, depending on what field. So using it when you're writing something or using it in a way that it's going to be more understood by the broader majority community. Some of them still use that terminology. So we use it in order to be a pathway towards learning and understanding.
And I've always chosen to identify as Latina over Hispanic. One, because growing up and being called derogatory names, right, and in an all-white community where I was raised, the derogatory term "spick" comes from Hispanic, right? And so I don't identify as Hispanic for that reason. And so thank you so much for sharing. And we're going to move on to the next set of questions under unfair systemic challenges. And Bo brought up the census, right? And the census serves to count everyone that lives in our country. And there are monetary benefits and gains. Programs are funded through the census. Our roads are fixed with money from the census, representation in Washington, D.C. and Lansing, based on the number of people who are counted living in communities. The census, we've all filled out the census, right? All of us here. I struggled this time because I did not have a box to check under race. I only had a box to check in ethnicity. And I struggled with that because typically I would mark indigenous. I've recently done my DNA and a majority of my DNA is Native American. But deeper than that, my ancestors were already on much of this land before it became America. So my people, my bloodline is indigenous to the United States. And I did not have that option based on the definition that was given. So, Reyna, what are your thoughts about why the current administration has chosen to end the gathering of census data earlier than initially the initial deadline? And then how can we best communicate the importance of everyone being counted, especially within those communities that aren't feeling very safe right now?
For me specifically, I think it boils down to limiting the representation of people of color in Congress. We know that the census data often leaves many people of color, immigrants, and other unrepresented groups uncounted. And so this data really gets transferred to determining the state's share of congressional seats, electoral college votes, and really funding, like federal funding that comes down to help community fund, all the resources that are needed, including our schools. I think that when it comes to our immigrant community, there is not enough education for them to make them realize the importance of being counted, especially the millions of undocumented immigrants that we have in the United States. Often they are scared to share any information with anyone, thinking that that is going to come back and hurt them. And it's very, very understandable. But this pandemic didn't make it any easier either for us to really get that, information out. And I think that we as Latinos need to do a better job of getting out there and talking to our own people. When it comes to undocumented families, is that relationship, right? They have to trust you in order to give you any information. And so how do we tackle that? We ourselves need to get out there and really talk to Latinos that have a language barrier and let them know the importance of being counted.
Beautiful, thank you. Erica, I saw you nodding your head, and I know that you do a lot of work in various areas in the community, working with young people as well as adults and doing advocacy. What are your thoughts on the census, and how can we better reach, as we're reaching a deadline, right, to get everyone counted? What can be done to help our populations understand the importance?
Thank you so much, Sonia, and thank you, Reyna, so much for your response as well. I think what's really important for us as a community overall is building trust. From my point of view, and seeing so many families in need, I really have been able to see how many resources we don't have as a community, and the importance of the census has never been more crucial than now. It saddens me that we are not able to have representatives who look like us in our communities to be able to collect the information that we need in a way that we feel comfortable, in a way that make us feel like we are going to truly be included. I think because so many of our resources are not allocated in the way that they should be in our community is another reason why our community is like, yeah, but does it really matter if we really do? Does it matter for us if we're undocumented and we can't even benefit from these things? Why are they collecting our information? So there's so many different reasons as to why people would just avoid even wanting anyone knowing who they are, where they are. For me, and Sonia, I'd like to kind of back from what you said. This year I had, they also asked me, what do I identify as? I said Puerto Rican, and they're like, well, okay, that's Hispanic. Well, it's Puerto Rican. And then they asked, well, do you identify as white? I said, well, not really, because my identity, my background is Afro-Latina, I know the African parts of my identity. I know what was taught to me growing up, and I know where I come from, but not everybody is comfortable or knows or identifies, and even just the Afro-Latino term itself brings a lot of controversy. So I really think that the census is an important way for us to communicate with our community. It's also a way for us to listen and learn what we need more of. I don't think that there are really many spaces within the census that allow us to say, hey, this is what we need, and this is and that's a whole mess in itself. But if we continue to support one another, if we continue to have representatives who look like us go in our communities, like I know the Latina Network, for example, was canvassing and going around and looking for ways to be able to get our community a little bit more involved. If we continue to do that, I think maybe in that grassroots standpoint, to reach out to our community, I believe that there will be more trust, and I'm hopeful that will happen in the future. But at the same time, we need to really realize, like, what is on the line for us, what is really there as an option for us to help us to grow. Like, what are those opportunities? Like, we're giving this information. Who are those representatives that are taking on that information and really willing to do something about it? And because we have not really seen action coming from that information too. I think that's another reason why people are just like, I don't really know if this is really important or not. But overall, the census is super important, and I'm going to continue doing everything that I can in my power to educate, my people, and put as much information as I can to the families that I serve, to the professionals in the spaces that I walk in through every day. And so that's just a little bit about how I feel about that.
Talking about census, actually, I'm gonna butt in with questions from one of our users. Melinda GT on Facebook is asking, do census workers go to those migrant work farms to help them be counted, or are they just, forgotten? Does anyone have an answer for that, or have any idea how that works?
The state of Michigan has a migrant, under DHHS, they have a migrant department, and they have been very intentional through their migrant resource councils to go out into the migrant camps and make sure that migrant workers are counted. And so there is some very intentional work that is done around making sure migrants are counted. The populations that I know I'm concerned with are the undocumented populations that aren't necessarily on migrant farms. And I know Reyna does work with undocumented populations within Ottawa County. And Reyna, I know you wanted to say something, so I will.
I was going to say that I was actually at a migrant camp like maybe a month and a half ago. And while I was there, someone that I personally know was there, and she was there taking census information. But again, that person didn't look like them. So she had to talk to me so that I could explain to them why she was there. And I had to really tell them, like, this census information is, it's good, is legit. It's okay for you to give out this information. But again, had I not been there, there would have been no one letting them know, no one that already has a relationship with them, right? That can advocate for them, that they feel can advocate for them. And there was that language barrier. That person that showed up there did not speak Spanish. And so although we're sending people out there, we're still not sending the right people.
That's a great point. And it goes back to Erica's comment about building trust. So thank you all for those responses. Another area that we find systemic challenges in as Latinos, Latinx, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans is college attainment and education. And so Jessica, currently we have, here in Grand Rapids, we have GRCC that educates the highest number by percentage of Latino students in the state of Michigan. Higher percentage even compared to U of M, MSU, GVSU. Yet we're not completing, we're not giving those diplomas out at the same rate that we're getting students to register for classes. So why do you think that is? Why do you think those statistics continue to persist negatively?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sonia. So currently right now, the Latino degree attainment in Michigan is at 25%. So that means there's 2.5 graduating for every 10 that are entering college. There is not one reason. A lot of the reasons, though, is around just being a first generation, right, student. Entering a system that wasn't created by us or for us, having to shift the way that we have lived through a collective frame. We use the words we, us, versus I or me, going into an individualistic ran system of you have to do this, you have to do that. And so often more than times, a lot of the barriers begin there. And then, what was mentioned, by Erica and Reyna about the trust too. It takes a minute to earn that trust, right? And when there's a lack of trust, there's a lack of safety or the sense of being safe. And so getting to being able to solve or find the solutions that a student may need, it takes a lot more work than a simple explanation of, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. I think the other part too is that our public school system holds a lot of that accountability. Off the top of my head, if anybody knows the number of students that are actually reaching college that are not college ready. So when you look at the Latino landscape that is entering college, many of them are spending lots of money, lots of time in remedial courses and not going directly into their field of study. That added time of just doing this type of work, that added time of being in a space of like still trying to discover who am I, what is it that I want to do, and not necessarily having the supports around, I think are the biggest barriers that Latinos do face, outside of just the finances, right? Knowing that college is expensive, so expensive, right? I think I had a conversation with a colleague who earned his doctoral, and this was probably 20 years ago. And they told me that they paid $5,000 a year in tuition to complete their doctoral, compared to, the tens of thousands of dollars it takes for just 1 year of undergraduate.
And if I could touch on that really quickly, I know that representation is something that we've talked about for a very long time. And when we have that lack of representation, using GRPS as an example, right? You have Jerry Aguilar, who's worked with students at Union for years, and how you represent who it is that you see, how it is that those supports that Jessica was speaking about, right? When you go into the college environment, who is it that you turn to? Who is it that you have? I was lucky enough to have persons like Luis Garcia at Michigan State University, Dr. Zavala down at Wayne State University, Dr. Chinea, Puerto Rican, Mexican males that I could then speak to, that provided those supports that are so necessary, that provided that representation. If we don't have those master's degrees, those doctoral degrees, if we don't have those persons as our counselors, right, in our high schools, in our junior high schools, that are going to lead us, that we can then turn to, and that we can then say, that is who I want to be like, and that's who I see myself as. Robert Eaglekraut, Native educator who I still to this day see as one of my role models, was one of those first persons, Dr. Cecilia Bailey, who was the first African-American woman that I had, who was a doctor, who was my 6th grade teacher, right? If we don't have that representation for Black and Latinx communities from a very early age, then those supports that we need in higher education won't be there. So we need to make those pathways as early as possible.
I have something to add to that as well. And at least from experience, it's like, a lot of our Latino students, college is not the only thing that they have, right? They have to work to help support their families, and so there's really comes a time where they have to decide whether they're going to help their families, support their families, or they're going to go to school. And so again, with the cost of tuition and, going to school at that time, going to college, doesn't pay the bills. And so unfortunately, because there's so many that find themselves in their situation, they just end up dropping off, and either going back a lot later or not going back at all.
Oops. And so I heard you all say a lot of things that bring me back to 2 words: cultural competence, right, or lack thereof, in higher ed. And Jessica, I heard you say something that resonated with me when I heard you say college ready, right? Our students aren't necessarily college ready. But my next question is, how do we change the narrative of these outcomes? And one of the things in my work in higher education is challenging my colleagues. Why are we always putting that pressure on our students of color? Why aren't we becoming student ready? Why are we always looking at pressuring our students to be college ready? We need to be doing some looking in, right? Looking at ourselves, our practices, our pedagogy, and making some changes there. So how can we change this narrative, Jessica?
That's a loaded question, Sonya. I can, this sounds like a one-on-one consultation.
But you know, we only have a window, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, one of the things is exactly what you said. I will say working with universities and working within the landscape of higher education, often these supports on campus are a one-time budget program. They're not necessarily put into the budget. So that in itself says where the priorities are at, right? Where your dollar is where the money is at, is what is important to you. The second part around that is, you know, understanding that it's a shift on both ends, right? And so there are some universities that are about publications, right? About research. So they're not necessarily student centered. And I think that's where you see the difference, depending on college and university, whether or not they truly are student centered or if they're centered on something else. As far as changing the narrative is reaching out, you know, regardless if you are in the work of higher education or not. If you know a Latino in college, know a Latino that is aspiring to that, you know that they are struggling. They are carrying some other type of load that as a first generation student often is not understood by their parents, often is not understood by the people closest to them, right? And so even being able to reach out and assist as we, you know, graduate one Latino at a time. You know, the graduation rate is increasing in higher education. The graduation rate among high school Latinos has gone up a lot in percentages. And I think it is one step at a time, one generation at a time. But there comes a time when knowing that, you know, if our graduation rate here in Michigan is at 25% for Latinos, we need to start demanding those same supports and resources if our dollar is equal to the other dollar of the student who's graduating. There is no discount for being Latino, right? There is no discount for less than support or resources, so.
Thank you for that. And that comment about getting a discount for being Latino actually kind of leads us into this last section of questions and dispelling myths, right? Because there are people that believe that just because we are Hispanic or Latino, we get free everything, right? And so much of that comes from ignorance. So during the 2016 election cycle, things about the Hispanic and Latino communities were being said to be used to instill fear into voters. Comments such as, Mexico sends us their rapists and their murderers, or MS-13 is a result of open borders and they're running the streets free and they're murdering and raping everyone. And some people believe that Mexicans are lazy and enjoy siestas, right? Because we see images of these big sombreros and people sleeping under trees. So how would you explain or discuss the Hispanic and Latino community and the various cultures that exist within our community to someone who may be unfamiliar about our culture and people? And I will direct that question to Erica and Reyna. We'll start with Erica.
Thank you, Sonya. So one thing I wanted to add earlier when Bo was discussing Hispanic and Latino, what the difference is. For me, in my understanding, Hispanic means from Spain. And so as, you know, in my generation, or how I've come to associate Hispanic is someone from Spain. So that's the first thing. When somebody says you're Hispanic, I'm like, no, Puerto Rican, and that's a Latin American country, the Caribbean, it's completely different. It's not the same thing. So that's where I start with education. A lot of times people are misinformed and they think that everybody is Mexican, and you have to let them know, no, not everybody is Mexican, and Mexico is a beautiful culture, but my culture is more Caribbean. And we celebrate things differently. We may call a different food something completely different, but sometimes it's the same exact thing. And so just being intentional about, and it does get exhausting having to teach everybody. And I don't like being the teacher all the time. And sometimes just like, dude, at this point, you're just being ignorant. But, some people will genuinely ask because they truly care and want to know. Other people do it just to kind of dig at you. And so sometimes you have to know kind of what's worth your effort and what's worth your breath at times. And yeah, some people don't deserve an answer because they're going to continue to be ignorant. So just kind of gauging that for yourself. I think that it's really important for you to stand tall in who you are, no matter what your identity is, no matter how how you identify and what Latino country you come from. Because at the end of the day, if you're not educated on your own culture, or if you don't have a way to be able to say, hey, you know what, this is a real barrier between us and we can't have this conversation if you can't try to understand where I'm coming from, and if you're just going to continuously be ignorant about it, you got to be able to set your boundaries as well. So I think that that it's important that, then we highlight, say, hey, even though I'm not Mexican, that's a beautiful culture, and this is how they celebrate. Or even if you know something about another culture that might not pertain to you. For example, for somebody who'll come up to me and say, oh, Cinco de Mayo, that's Mexican independence. It's like, no, like it has to do with a battle in Puebla, Mexico that happened, and really, like, not all of Mexico celebrates it. It's really more that, and we've just turned it into this thing in America that's like Cinco de Drinko, and it's really not okay, and it's not appropriate. So really, for me, it's in those moments, it's an opportunity to educate, and even though it's exhausting to educate, sometimes people don't know, and so just do your best and kind of gauge what's worth your energy or not. For me at this point, it's like, it's 2020. If you're not trying to really understand, that's just because of your own ignorance. That's how I approach things, to be fully transparent. But yeah, I mean, if you got questions, ask me. If you don't, or if you don't have anything productive to ask me, just like, don't ask me.
And in the world of Google, right?
Right.
Exactly.
There's so much information at your fingertips. Or go to the library.
I was going to say, go to the library. We can show you a couple of sections of in the stacks about different cultures within the Latino communities. But I think that's a really good point. Educating the community and connecting them to resources as well when they don't know what's available to learn and understand different Latino communities. It's really important too. I've had that come up so many times. Like, don't you guys celebrate Cinco de Mayo in Puerto Rico? I'm like, no. Dia de los Muertos? No. So there's like a lot of like things that are different in cultures, but there's also things that are similar within our Latino cultures. So it's usually a good thing to educate and represent your culture.
Yeah, and so I call Cinco de Mayo Budweiser holiday. People in Puebla don't even celebrate it, and so it's become a celebration for people who don't look like us, and or come from our culture and background. Reyna, what are your thoughts?
So I grew up in Houston, where everyone, was Salvadoreño, Mexicano, Puerto Riqueño, and all of this. And then I came to West Michigan, where if you're brown, you're Mexican. And, all of us are really proud of our heritage and where we come from. And so that was like a big struggle for me, for like, no, just because you're brown doesn't mean from Mexico. There's like so many different countries. And so I found myself always having to educate people on that piece, especially living in Grand Haven, right? For me, and like really being like a handful of people of color here. So it was, I also see, because we do have a big Mexican population, how people would think that. But for me, it was so important for people to know that we're more than one country. We are so many different countries. And although we share this umbrella of richness and diversity, we are also very different in our foods and our music. And so one way that I felt that I needed to educate my community was to hold a celebration. Here in Holland, we have Fiesta, but that's only celebrates the Mexican, heritage. And so for me, I always felt left out. And so last year was the first year where I co-chair the Grand Haven Hispanic Heritage Fiesta, and it was like 100% concentrated on the richness of Hispanic heritage. So funny that you say Hispanic Latino. I also learned through doing some, research on Hispanic heritage that Hispanic heritage is for countries that speak Spanish, and the countries that are in Latin America but don't speak Spanish, then you consider them Latinos. So that's my little bit of knowledge that I gained from just learning. So for me, I can be Hispanic and Latina, but not every Latino can be Hispanic if they don't speak the native language, right, of those countries. So that's what I learned. But again, for me, it was important for people to know that we are from all of these different countries. Our food is different, and I wanted them to experience that, because it's only through experiencing and also getting to know each other that we break barriers. We make those relationships. People get to know us for who we are as people, and not stereotypes that they see on TV, media, and certainly nowadays the rhetoric that comes from the White House. So it's important, I think, for us to, I know it gets exhausting, but I also think it's important for us to continue to sharing our experiences and educating others, because that's the only way that we're going to break those barriers and make relationships. And ultimately, relationships are what really breaks stereotypes.
Thank you. And you made some very valid points. Bo and Jessica, I'm going to direct the last question to you, and then we'll have hopefully a few minutes for any questions or comments that have come through in the chat on Facebook. But what can we do as a community, whether we're Latino, Latinx, Chicana, Puerto Riqueña, Dominican, white, it doesn't matter, but what can we all do together collectively to start changing the messages that are being sent in imagery, misappropriations when it comes to Halloween costumes, or things like that? Like, what can we do to be more intentional about dispelling those myths and breaking those stereotypes, and showing people and teaching people who we really are and what we stand for, what our religions are, what our cultures are? We'll start with Bo and then Jessica.
I was with a colleague yesterday, and he said that a statement was made that, well, sometimes I feel like I don't belong. And when we're talking about belonging in the sense of belonging, we are reclaiming, as First Nation, Black, and Latinx communities, we're reclaiming spaces that we built. We are reclaiming spaces, and we're reclaiming areas that were our communities prior to colonization. So when we're talking about stereotypes, those are stereotypes, and those are ways that we can say, no, we belong here, right? Representation, being in spaces and feeling and acknowledging the fact that these spaces were built for us. They are ours. So whenever we feel like we don't belong, it's acknowledging and understanding, and it takes, for some, a lifetime of understanding, but being able to say, no, this is my space, and I belong here as much as, if not more, than others, right? So when we're looking at our First Nation communities, when we're looking at our Black communities, when we're looking at our Latinx communities, we can't say to ourselves many of the times that I feel like I don't belong, because we are reclaiming spaces that we have been forced out of, that we have been diminished from. So when we're looking at spaces that we built, that are ours, we cannot let dominant patriarchal language drive us away from that. So just understanding that, being there, bringing others along with us in that education that Reyna was talking about, that everyone has touched on. But it's that education and those relationships that are going to change that in the future.
If I can add a little bit to what Bo also said when it talks about reclaiming our space, I think us as Latinos, some of us shame other Latinos for also not speaking Spanish, and so they don't feel included as like Latinos. And so I really dislike when people do that. And for me, is personally because my kids know very little Spanish. But if you knew my daughter, she's more Latina than me. And so the way that where we come from, the way that we are, does not matter if we don't speak Spanish. If we're Latinos, we have to embrace them and not shame them. We have felt at some point or another that we don't, that we haven't fit in and we're not welcome. We can't do that to other Latinos.
Yeah. And that's honestly a topic all on its own, right? That along with colorism within the Latino, Hispanic, and Latino communities. Loana.
Thank you so much, Reyna, for explaining that, because in the comment section, a lot of people were talking about, why are you guys talking about being Hispanic or Latino and you're all speaking in English and non-Spanish? So that's the answer right there. Reyna, thank you for addressing that within your conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to what Bo said, like, what is it that we can do? He said, reclaiming our space. The other thing is reclaiming our narrative, right? And it starts with our own circles, our inner circles, our families, our friends. Because honestly, what is that saying? Like, if you can't take care of your own house, you can't take care of anybody else's house. And so reclaiming that narrative is addressing the internalized oppression, right? That we have accepted or have been told to us as children. It's healing the trauma that we've lived, right? Because that in itself really shapes how we look at ourselves and how we look at our community. And so I think from my personal narrative, right, and kind of to what Bo had said, I'm born and raised here in Michigan, but I always felt this thing of like, where do I belong? I don't necessarily belong on this side, I don't belong on that side. I have a different group outside of house, out of home. And it wasn't until I had made a trip to California, right? And if you know California and East Los Angeles, all these stories that you hear as a kid is like the Mecca for a Mexican, right? Chicana. But what I seen there is that they have their challenges as well, and coming back, it's like, okay, it's not about finding a place of belonging. It's about making that space of belonging, right? Which is something completely different than just trying to see where you fit in. The other thing that I wanted to say around Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. So Cecilia Munoz wrote a beautiful book. It's called More Than Ready. It came out this year. In there, she perfectly really described the entire argument. She explains Hispanic as refers to ancestry in Spanish-speaking worlds. That Latino refers to our geographic country within Latin America. And then Latinx makes the case of making our language more inclusive, meaning that those who do not conform to either gender, that they deserve the same as we, as Latinos, Latinas, Chicanos, whatever, as we push for that inclusivity in work and school and everywhere else. Our families, our community members that don't identify with those gender conformities deserve the same. And so a lot of that education, right, starts among our circle. It starts internally, right? What are some of those narratives that we're still holding on to and essentially judging other people by, right? Shaming them for not speaking Spanish, not knowing, because historically, right, my parents growing up, when they were in school, they were actually punished for speaking Spanish. And so a lot of parents thought that they were protecting their children by not passing on the language. And so again, what Erica said, we need to educate ourselves, right? What better place to do it than the Grand Rapids Public Library?
Yeah, I was gonna butt in a little bit. We have a question that's a little bit similar to what you were mentioning, and Paola Mendeville is asking, what are we doing to ensure that our future leaders, the children we're raising, learn and understand their roots so that later in life they don't struggle with identifying or with a term, and they know how to respond to some uncomfortable questions when they get asked.
I'll quickly touch on that, but then I'll open that up to anyone. And all of that really starts at home, right? And then we have work to do as a community to ensure that our public schools are teaching our histories, our stories in an appropriate and accurate way, not the whitewashed current curriculum that exists across our country. And that's my opinion, but it all starts at home. And I wanted to echo what Jessica said, and Joaquin Castro talked about that when he was running for president, and that his mother was in the mindset that she was protecting him and his brother by not teaching them Spanish because of the history that goes along with that. And I think anytime we take time to judge, we also need to take time to learn and understand, and not spend so much time and energy in judging. But I do want to open this up to any of the panelists that want to answer Paola's question.
I wanted to just add my own thing because I'm very proud of where I come from, and my children are both Puerto Rican and Dominican. I'm full Puerto Rican and their father is full Dominican, but he also has like Turkish and a lot of really cool things mixed with him as well. For me, I was very intentional and have been and still am and will always be intentional about my children understanding the culture. Not only that, I have sent them to Puerto Rico with grandma. I have been with them to Puerto Rico myself. They understand that even in our town in Añasco in Puerto Rico, that we were enslaved. Our people were enslaved. Our Tainos were enslaved. Not only that, we had Africans come into our island that were also enslaved, and some of them ran off into the mountains and ran into different places of Puerto Rico. And they understand that the diaspora. They understand when those mixes and those changes happen, because I was very intentional about making sure that they did. And I will always educate my children. My great grandmother was God rest her soul, was the wisdom that brought that onto us and let us know you come from African blood. She would buy us African dolls and indigenous dolls, and we were very proud of where we came from. And for me, it's just a pride thing. It's love for my culture, love for my island. Another thing that I was very intentional about is when my children were in Puerto Rico, and thankfully my parents too, they brought them to the plaza, and they would see in the plaza in Añasco, there is a statue of the Taino Indians drowning the Spaniards because they were told that they were gods. They came with their ships and their guns, and they convinced our people and oppressed them to a point to where they thought that they were greater and bigger than them. So the Tainos in my town said, well, if you're gods, then you float. You're not going to drown. So they put them out into the ocean and drowned them, and realized, what? Hey, these people are human just like us, and we're able to then, create that revolution, which then caused, for a lot of that oppression to start changing. And so I know that about myself. I know that it's my responsibility to pass that on to my children so that they can be educated and pass that along. As far as, and so that if those conversations, those uncomfortable questions come up, they can stand firm in what that is, because that's facts, that's factual. It's not coming from a watered down textbook. It's from our land, from our people, from, storytellers. We are storytellers. We tell stories through song. We tell stories through, by word of mouth. And that's the beautiful and rich thing about us as Latinos, and each and every one of us. We are who we are because we've had these stories passed down to us. We've had these traditions handed down to us. The more that we celebrate them, and the more that we are intentional about showing the world, like, for example, Three Kings Day, Reyes, that's bigger than Christmas for us. We don't even celebrate Christmas on the 25th. We celebrate it on the 24th. So, that's just what it is for us. And we carry those traditions with pride. And I'm very intentional about making sure that my kids will educate whoever comes to them about anything. And, even just the people that I keep around me. My best friend is not Latina, but you darn right, she knows what arroz con gandules is. And she's mad at me that 16 years later, she doesn't know Spanish, but you know what? She understands why we celebrate our traditions and do too. So it comes along with, you know, pride in yourself, knowledge in where you come from, and knowing that our people are storytellers, knowing all of those beautiful, rich traditions that have been passed on, and continuing to educate the people and our children so that they can stand with pride with those stories as well.
Thank you. Oswaldo, are there any other questions in the chat?
Actually, it's a comment from Daniel Brubaker, and he says, my kids identify as mixed because their mom is from Mexico and I'm European American. It's been fascinating seeing them figure out their identity. They tend to emphasize their Mexican side because that's the side that makes them special, and he loves that from them. And I want to bring to the point that it doesn't matter what tag either government agencies or other people put on you. It's what you feel that you are. If you feel like you're Hispanic, then you're Hispanic. If you feel like you're Latino, then you're Latino. So it's a matter of just self-identification and then being proud of who you are.
Thank you for that.
I often tell the youth and other people, you are not bicultural, you are not biracial, you are doubled culture. You are 100% of that and 100% of that. If anything, you're 200% of all these things, right? And I think, again, that reclaiming that narrative is that we're not just part or half of this, we're all of this and this.
There's a quote that says, el que habla dos idiomas vale por dos. The person who speaks two languages is worth double. So I appreciate that, Jessica. Reyna?
Well, I was going to say to that comment on Facebook, my children are half Salvadorian, you know, half white. And so again, I think my husband has been really fascinating because again, if you were to ask my daughter, you know, her ethnicity, she'll be Latina, and I'm like, no, you're both, you know, and but that's how she feels. And again, to what Erika said, it starts at home. Especially for me, living in Grand Haven has always been very lonely, right? Like there is no culture, my culture here that I could really take my kids to. So the culture that they've learned is what I taught them at home, right? Like the music and the language was really hard because the language is really not spoken here. So it was difficult for me to do that. I know it's my fault. They don't like me for it, believe me. But it's been fascinating how they identify themselves. And so, you know, I'm proud of it. I'm a proud Latina, and you can see that side of me has really resonated with them, and that's how they've been able to identify.
Thank you so much. It is close to 7 o'clock. Osvaldo, is there any other things that?
Yeah, definitely. So I have actually a comment from Jose Amoros Alicea. This could be fact-checked. I've not fact-checked yet, but anyone could fact-check, Google it, please. But he says, he's been very active in the comment section. He says, Hispanic contribution to the founding of this country, the USA, is something that unfortunately even Hispanics do not know. The very town of St. Joseph here in West Michigan, San Jose, and was founded by Spanish soldiers fight on the side of Anglo-American in the American Revolution. So,
interesting.
Yeah, it's one thing that I also have noticed within family members, that they are not aware of their own contributions as Latino Americanos.
And much of that goes to our K-12 curriculum. If we're raising our children in the United States, the education that we got, the education that they are getting is not accurate. We are not, our K-12 system is perpetuating many of the misconceptions and the myths and the stereotypes because the curriculum is propaganda, at least in my opinion, to maintain the system that currently exists. And it's our responsibility as parents, and it's our responsibility as community members to hold our K-12 systems accountable. Run for school board, be vocal, go to school board meetings, show up at your student's classroom, ask questions.
Yeah, be loud, be heard.
Ultimately, it starts at home. And it's our responsibility as parents to make sure that our children are learning about who they are from us. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Grand Rapids Public Library for the intentionality around the work that you've done during Hispanic and Latino Heritage Month and the work that you've got planned out for the entire month. I want to thank our panelists, Jessica Ledesma, Erica Soto, Reyna Masko, and Adonis Torres, for taking time out of your evening to share your stories, your opinions, your views, experiences. My hope is that the community will be richer for the last hour that we've spent together. And at the end of the day, whether you're Hispanic, Latino, white, Black, we are all human beings, and we all deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. And we all have a desire to be loved and cared for. So with that, I wish you a good night. Thank you for being with us, and stay connected.
Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Good night.
Thanks for all the participants in our comment sections too.
All right. Be sure to check out our other events that are happening. And if you miss any of the other events in the past, they will all be on Facebook or our YouTube channel. So be sure to check those out. Our events will always remain on our social media pages, so you can backtrack. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.